So we're still here on page 1 in the Maimer Kol Yisrael. Now they have a said in Tufshin Lav Gimel, but it's in the Rebbe's Maimorim called Sefer Maimorim Lukit Chelik Dalet, 4th volume. So we left off yesterday with the question that the words Kol Yisrael Yesh Lem Chelik Leilam Haba is referring to the time of Tchias HaMesim. And it means that everyone, literally everyone, without exception, everyone will have a share in the world to come. However, when it comes to Gan Eden is where the neshama goes after 120. It says that not everybody is able to enter Gan Eden, even though it's very few people. But nevertheless, there are certain conditions, and sometimes if these conditions are not satisfied, then the neshama can't enter Gan Eden. So the question is, being that the time of Tchias HaMesim, what will be revealed from Hashem is not just a little bit greater, not even a lot more, it's infinitely more. And how do we know that? From the simple fact that neshamas who were in Gan Eden for thousands of years, and neshamas of tzaddikim, which means even when they first entered Gan Eden, they were already in a very, very high spiritual place. And then after that, they continue to grow spiritually, they continue to advance spiritually, even after their passing in Gan Eden. It says that just like we daven 3 times a day, the neshamas in Gan Eden are elevated 3 times a day. And that's throughout the year. The day that they passed away, which is the anniversary of their passing, on that day, the neshama goes up way higher. And this goes on year after year after year, and for some neshamas, it's thousands of years. So we can't even begin to imagine how high they are. Nevertheless, their reward is going to be to come back down to the physical world and experience what we'll experience in time of Tchias HaMesim. So clearly, Tchias HaMesim must be something so much infinitely greater that it makes sense for the neshama, after all that, to still come down here. So how could it be that Tchias HaMesim, which is so much greater, everybody will merit? Gan Eden, which is not you can't compare it to that some will merit and some won't merit. Like the story with person was called Elisha ben Avoya. Good morning. The person who was called Acher, that he didn't merit to go into Gan Eden. In fact, the only reason why it did happen was only because Reb Meir, Reb Yochanan intervened, and they davened for him. But in essence, he was barred from going to the Gan Eden. Now the Rebbe asked another question. So we're on page 2. Those of you who have the Maimer, it's still it's Eis Beis in the Maimer. We have the line that begins with the word Al Yadei. It's that 5 lines before the end of Eis Beis, before the end of Eis Beis. I know another question is Shemechalukim ben Gilu de Gan Eden. One of the differences between the godly presence that will be revealed, that is revealed in Gan Eden, Gilu de Lasad Lavoi, and the godly presence that will be revealed when Mashiach comes after Tchias HaMesim, Ushabedei lekabel Gilu de Gan Eden, in order for the neshama to receive and to absorb, to be able to experience the godly light that's going to shine in Gan Eden, what is pashto, hapshata, midvarim agashmi. The neshama has to, digest itself, has to let go of the gashmistic world and the gashmistic presence, which means Shekoidim aliyas and neshama, the Gan Eden, before the neshama goes into Gan Eden, tzarich liyas tchila hatfila b'nahar dinur. Wrote down in the Zohar that in Gan Eden there's a river, and this river is called Nahar Dinur. And before the neshama goes into the place in Gan Eden, it has to immerse itself, just like a person before they go to the Beis Hamikdash, for example, had to immerse themselves in the mikveh to be purified. A person who is impure has to purify himself by immersing in a mikveh. Over there's a spiritual mikveh. It's called Nahar Dinur. And the neshama has to immerse itself in the mikveh. What's the point? The neshama is already pure. In fact, we say every day in davening, "And neshama shenasatabi," the neshama that you gave us, tahirahi, the pure neshama. The answer is the shkoyach chizuk the hayalma. The neshama, in order to go into Gan Eden, has to forget what this world looked like. I need to explain that a little bit. What it's basically saying is that when the neshama goes to Gan Eden, it has to be able to let go of the image that it had when it was in this physical world, because the transition is the gap between this world and that world is so great that unless the neshama sort of lets go of that image that it had before, it won't be able to absorb the new image. What does that mean? To give an example, we know there are two Gemaras. There's a Gemara called Talmud Bavli, and there's a Gemara called Talmud Yerushalmi. What does it mean? Technically, Talmud Bavli is the Gemara that was written by the sages who lived in Bavel, and Talmud Yerushalmi was written by the sages that lived in Eretz Yisrael. And that Talmud was actually finished 100 years before the Bavli Talmud. The Talmud Bavli was completed by someone, actually two people. One was called Ravina, and one was called Rav Ashi. And the Talmud Yerushalmi was written by someone called Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says that there was someone by the name of Rabbi Zera who lived in Babylon. And then he decided to go live in Israel. And there he'll be joining the yeshivas of Israel. So what did he do? This is what it says in the Gemara. He fasted. According to one opinion, he fasted 40 fast days. Another opinion, he fasted 100 fast days. What was the purpose of his fasting? That he should forget what he learned in Babel, so he'll be able to adjust to the learning in Israel. It's based on the pasuk. There's a pasuk in Eicha. Eicha is all about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and Golus. So there's a pasuk b'machshakim hashivani, Hashem, you put me into a place of darkness. So the Gemara, by the way, the Gemara Bavli says, what does that mean? That the place of darkness, that's Talmud Bavli. In other words, Talmud Yerushalmi, because it's in Eretz Yisrael, is light. It's like learning Torah and everything is lit up. Talmud Bavli is learning Torah and it's dark. So therefore, Talmud Yerushalmi is at a higher level. In order to make that change, that he should make the transition from learning here to go learning there, he had to forget what he learned before in order to get to learn in the new place. On the surface, it's very difficult to understand for two reasons. First of all, we all know from our own personal experience, the way it is out there everywhere in the world, is that when we're achieving academically, learning whether you're learning Torah or Lahavdil, learning any other wisdom, it's not that what I learned in the first grade is some sort of a interference with what I'm going to learn in the second grade, and the third grade, and the fourth grade. What I learned in elementary school is an interference with what I'm going to learn in high school. On the contrary, what I learn in the lower grades prepares me, that's a stepping stone to go to the higher grades. But when I finished elementary, my knowledge that I have from elementary is what leads me into being able to study things that are more complicated in high school. And when I finish that, that gives me the ability to understand things that are more complicated on the college level, and in the secular wisdom, and the same thing in Torah. We learn Chumash, then we learn Gemara, we learn Mishnayos, and we go higher and higher. The more you learn, the more you're able to absorb. And if you forget everything you learn, you won't be able to learn the higher level of learning. So what does it mean? Forget everything I learned so I can adjust to the higher level of learning? That's one question. The second question is actually a commandment in the Torah which says you're not allowed to forget Torah that you learn. And if you do, it's a lav. It's you violated something which is a commandment in the Torah. Of course, the Gemara asks, what do you mean if you do? If you forget, it's not your fault. Your memory isn't working. It means you don't make the effort to remember, or you do something specifically to get it out of your head. But of course, the way to remember is by reviewing and so on and so forth. So how can it be that a Tana, an Amora, a Bzeira, one of the sages of the Gemara, should actually fast, that he should forget what he learned? You're not allowed to forget what you learned. So the way this is explained in Chassidus was, Chas v'shalom, it doesn't mean to forget what you learn. If you forget what you learn, how in the world are you going to be able to enter a new level of learning and understanding? But it means that the method of learning, the approach of learning in Bavel was very different than the approach of learning in Eretz Yisrael. It was a different way of learning. And therefore, when we say that he forgot, or he needed to forget, and he had to fast in order to forget, it wasn't to forget what he learned, Chas v'shalom, the Torah that he studied. It means to forget the way of learning, the approach to learning of Bavel, so we can adjust to the higher level learning of Eretz Yisrael. I was trying to think a lot of what we can think of an example to that, but I would give maybe one example would be, someone told me that this is someone who learned in the yeshiva in Lubavitch years back. He said when his teacher began to teach him Chassidus, he told them that when you're studying Chassidus, you have to get into your head, it's a different approach of learning and understanding. And he gave him an example. Imagine you're talking to a peasant, and you try to explain to the peasant the difference between Chokhmah and Bina. And he explained that Chokhmah is like this, and Bina is like that. At the end of the explanation, he'll probably turn to you and say, so which one is longer, Chokhmah or Bina? No, it's not about longer. Chokhmah is deeper because this and this, and Bina like that. So is it round or is it square? What color is it? What kind, is it hard like something like wood, or is it soft like cotton? In other words, a peasant only understands things in the very physical world. When you start explaining to them, you say that Chokhmah is this way and Bina is that way, or Chesed is harsh, is softer, and Bina. These words, he can only understand them in the physical definition. But the truth is, when you're talking about things that are ruchnius, you might be using similar words, but it's a whole different kind of an understanding. Hard doesn't mean physically hard, and soft doesn't mean physically soft, and deep doesn't mean physically deep, like a deep closet, and superficial doesn't mean superficial, like physically something superficial on the surface of the water. Everything has a meaning that is figurative and metaphoric, and it's much deeper because you're dealing with things that are abstract. So basically, it's almost like a different language, a different way of understanding things. That's one example that when I start learning things that are Hasidus, I remember I was once teaching a group of boys from a different yeshiva, and I tried to explain to them the difference between Gashmis and Ruchnis. I explained to them that Gashmis is something that's, how do you define Gashmis? Anything that you could grasp with one of the five senses. If you could touch it, or smell it, or taste it, or see it, or hear it, that means it belongs to the Gashmizik realm. If it can be grasped by any of these ways, it's not something you can touch, or taste, or smell, or feel, or see, or hear, then that's called Ruchnis. I spoke for at least 3/4 of an hour explaining myself. And then when I finished, the reason why I did it was because I kept saying Gashmis and Ruchnis, and I realized we weren't communicating. Why not? Because they thought I meant Ruchnis is davening and learning, and Gashmis means eating and sleeping and doing business. I said, no, there are things that exist that are called gashmistic entities, and there are ruchnistic entities. A ruchnistic entity means something that it exists but doesn't have physical features, doesn't have any of these dimensions, and therefore you can't grasp them with any of these five senses. So I explained myself for a very long time. And then I asked them, do you understand it now? So one guy told me, yeah, he heard that a demon is ruchnis. Basically, what he understood was that it's something gashmis, but it's invisible. Now, when you think of invisible, it means there's a table looks like this, but for some reason or other, it's able to be invisible, which means again, I can't get out of the description of a physical thing that is high and big and fat and pulls in and pulls out. Oh, some are visible, some are invisible. No, it's not invisible. It's a different kind of existence. Something which is like intellect. Intellect exists just like a potato exists, but it exists in a different way. I can't even describe how it exists. I can only know this from my experience because I have intellect in my head, I hope. But we don't really, you can't describe it to anyone. I don't know what it looks like. If someone didn't experience intellect or didn't experience any emotion, there's no such person. But if they wouldn't know what I'm talking about, I can't explain it to them because we don't even know ourselves what it looks like. I know what the experience is like, what kind of sensation it is in my head or my heart, but I can't define it. So therefore, when you say gashmi, you say ruchni is, it's not something which looks like a pencil, but it's invisible. It's something that exists in a totally different way. So taking this higher and higher and higher, when the neshama goes to Gan Eden, it's a spiritual world, and things there exist in a totally different way. And as long as I don't let go of the way I used to think about things, I can never adjust to it. And the same is also with Rabbi Zera when he changed yeshivas. It wasn't that he forgot the Torah, but it was Gemara is not Ruchnius. Gemara is not like Chassidus. It's still Gemara, but it was such a higher, deeper level of understanding that would be considered so deep that we had to let go of the other approach of learning and understanding to adapt to the new approach of learning and understanding. So another gashmitic mashal for this would be that when you're walking up a staircase, the way it works is that you put your foot on one step, then you put your other leg on the other step, then you put your other foot on the next step. And while you have one foot on this step, and that's how you keep walking. But what if you want to go to a spot that's much further away? It's not just a step away, it's 20 steps away. The only way to get there is by jumping. What's jumping? Have to totally let go of where I was standing before. There's actually moments where I'm in the air, which means I'm not here and I'm not there. And then I can land on that higher step. So the same thing is intellectually or spiritually. Sometimes the place that I'm going to is spiritually or intellectually so much higher that I can't hold on to where I was and then take another step. I have to totally let go of where I was before, and I have to be suspended in the air, meaning to say, I'm not here, not there yet. And then I can go to the next level. Because as long as I'm still holding on to the image of where I was, I can't adjust and I can't absorb and I can't accept this new image. It just won't register in my head. It says, I've said this also, that this is the deeper meaning behind mikveh. When a person is impure and immerses in a mikveh, they become pure. Or in a situation of conversion. A person is not Jewish, they immerse in the mikveh, they become Jewish. Of course, the mikveh is something which is beyond our understanding. Like the Rambam writes, if a person would be washed with all the waters in the world, all the oceans and all the rivers, it won't do the job. It has to be a mikveh. 40 rainwater, and I immerse in the water the way it's supposed to be according to halacha. So it's something spiritual. But one of the things that it says about mikveh is that when a person goes under the water, it means for a moment I'm a non-existent entity. In other words, I was one kind of person before. Now I want to become a different kind of person. I was before impure, now I want to become pure. By immersing in the mikveh, there's a moment that I let go completely where what was there before, and when the person comes out of the mikveh, there's a new person there. I don't know if it was ever pointed out in the classes, but okay. You always want to make me work. Where's the eraser? Maybe I'll use this. So this is the Hebrew word mikvah, tefillah. Tefillah means to immerse. Tes, beis, yud, lamed, hey. Which means to immerse. You rearrange the letters, it's hey, beis, yud, tes, lamed. In other words, the purpose of the tefillah is that for a moment I sort of let go, forget myself completely, and then I can become this new person. They bring an example of a seed. A seed you put into the ground, and what grows out of it is something which is not just a little bit more than before, but you can't even compare it. A tree grows out of it. But the way it happens, the process is you put the seed in the ground, the seed has to decompose in the ground, gets absorbed in the soil, and then from the seed a tree can grow. Again, there's a moment where it becomes no and nothing, and then it grows into the new entity, even though it's coming from the original seed that was there before. I would think that even in the process of someone who is not following Torah mitzvahs and takes on a new approach in life to Torah mitzvahs, there's certain things in life which I experienced before that actually help me move forward. I don't have to let go of everything. But there's certain things that if I keep my old way of looking at things, I'll never be able to, after I sort of let go of that picture completely, that approach, and I have to realize Torah is a whole different approach. In certain areas, that's the only way to get there. So therefore, with the neshama, we find that the neshama, the difference between this world and the spiritual world, and Gan Eden, of course, is the gap is huge. And therefore, in order to get to that higher level, the neshama goes through a process which is also like a mikveh. It's a river, or naturally in a spiritual metaphoric language. And through that, the neshama is able to let go. It doesn't forget about this world. The neshama up there remembers all their relatives and davens for them, but it means forgets the way they saw things from this world. In simple words, the way we saw things in this world is that everything is gashmius and everything is nature, and Hashem is something you have to struggle to recognize. Over there is the opposite. Everything is Hashem. We have to struggle to think that there are places or people that don't recognize that. It's the other way around. So it's a whole different way of looking at things. Not only that, but keep going in the bracket. In Gan Eden itself, when the neshama goes from one level to a higher level, there's also a process, even there, a process of going through to this Nahar Dinur, this river. Shebechol Aliyah, every elevation that the neshama has, that's to first let go and forget of that pleasure and that perception that it had in the lower level in order to adjust to the higher level. So I would imagine, if that's the case, that if that's what the neshama needs to go through to understand things up there, how much more so in Tchias HaMesim? Because we just finished explaining that in Tchias HaMesim, the godly light that will be revealed is infinitely, infinitely greater than the highest levels of Gan Eden. And over here, it's just the opposite. In order to receive that light that's going to shine when Mashiach comes, how is that? Dafka by the neshama going in the body. How does that make sense? Just the opposite. By the way, this is another way that they explain, again, not that Hashem couldn't do things other ways, but obviously Why? What is just to understand what the process is, and not understanding why, but the process that we see that Golus leads to Geula. In fact, even in Golus itself, there's a certain point where things get worse before it gets better. Is also the same principle. That again, in the language of Chassidus, it's called Yesh Miyesh Ayin Be'emtza, which means one entity comes from another entity. There has to be in the middle between the two levels ayin. It becomes null and void. It becomes ayin, and then it becomes yesh. So now the Rebbe starts explaining it, and the rest of the Maim is going to be all about the difference between Gashmis and Ruchnius, and the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. As remember, we spoke about this before Shavuos, that studying Torah has an advantage over mitzvahs, and mitzvahs has an advantage over studying Torah. And here we will discuss a few of these things. So this is Ois Gimel. It's written, Zeis Teres Ha'adam. There's a passage where it says, Zeis Teres Ha'adam. Where is the pasuk? You have it here on page 19. It's in Parshas Chukas. It's actually talking about the laws of purity and impurity, but it begins with saying, Zeis Teres Ha'adam. These are the laws of a person if this and this happens. But the Gemara says that this introduction, Zeis Teres Ha'adam, teaches us something. Sha'tere b'dugmas Adam. That the way Hashem created Adam, a person, and the way Hashem created the Torah, there are similarity, they're parallel to each other. Whatever you find in the world, you'll find in Torah. The structure is similar. So just like a person consists of both, he has a guf and he has a neshama. The same is with Torah, sheish b'guf and neshama. The Torah also has a body and the Torah has a soul. What is the body and the soul in Yiddishkeit? The chlolos, generally speaking, this is the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are Ramach mitzvahs, same Ramach Yivarim the Malka. How many mitzvahs are there? 248. And what does the number 248 represent? The 248 organs of the body. So mitzvahs are compared to the body. These words, Yivarim the Malka, this quote comes from the Zohar. And Zohar says that the 248 mitzvahs are the 248 organs of the king, meaning Hashem. Of course, Hashem doesn't have any organs, chas v'shalom. So it means that there are 248 different levels, and every mitzvah draws down a different light from Hashem. But in the meantime, we see that it's compared to organs. And the truth is, there are a lot of reasons why it's compared to organs. Of course, on the surface, the comparison is just like organs. Each one has their function. The eye has its function, and the ears have their function, and the heat, the hands and the feet. And every organ in the body is necessary. Even if the other organs are absolutely functioning on the highest level. A person's vision is amazing, and his hearing is amazing, and these are very athletic with his feet. But still, you need all the other organs, but each one contributes something. Same thing with mitzvahs. Each mitzvah contributes something different spiritually. It draws down a different spiritual light. But besides that, there's another point, and that is, Ahmad said, there's another reason why mitzvah compared to organs is because the organs in the body not only allow different powers of the soul to express itself. In other words, where does the power of vision come from? Where does the power of intellect come from? Where does the power of emotion come from? It's not from the body, even though science will tell you it's from the body, because science doesn't believe in a neshama. But the body is physical. The body is flesh and blood and bones and muscles and skin. Where does something like emotion come from? Where does something like intellect come from? Joy, sadness, excitement, fear, anger. This is not the body, it's the neshama. But the neshama can't express itself without the body. So if chas v'shalom there's something wrong with the eye, then the power of vision can it's like a person who doesn't have a pen, even if they're an amazing artist, they can't do anything without a pen or a brush. They need a tool. So the power of vision of the soul uses the eye as a tool. The physical ear is a tool for the power of hearing. The mouth is a tool for the power of speech. But there's another point. Not only that these organs are tools, but the organs in the mitzvahs, they draw down the light of Hashem into this world. And the same is also with the organs of the body, which means not only the eyes and the ears and the nose and the mouth are a keli, they're a vessel that certain faculties of the soul can express itself through the organs, but these organs actually draw down certain faculties from the neshama. For example, if a person chas v'sholom had some sort of an accident, and as a result of the accident, they lost their hearing. Something happened to the ear. Some injury was done to the eardrum. And as a result of that, they became deaf. And the doctor says we couldn't correct this with surgery. Okay. So you ask a question, if the power of hearing comes from the neshama, why can't they hear? The damage was done to the physical organ, not to the neshama. So the answer is, yeah, but the neshama's power of hearing has to go through the physical organ, and the physical organ is not available. There's an obstruction there. Okay, go to the doctor, he does surgery, which means he fixes, he repairs whatever obstruction is there, whatever injury is there, and then the person starts hearing. So you can ask a question, what happened to the power of hearing when the person's ear was injured? Where did it go? How would we know? So the Chassidus, it goes back to its source, where it came from, it goes back to the neshama. So the question is, if you go to a doctor, and the doctor fixes the eardrum, and the doctor fixes the eyes, and does whatever needs to be done, he corrects the damage, but how in the world does the power of hearing or the power of vision come back from the soul into the organ? The doctor doesn't do anything about that. To use a mushroom, if I have a cup and I put water in the cup, and then damage is done to the cup. What happens to the water? It leaks out. There's no more water left. Then I go and I fix the cup. Yeah, but the water's not going to come back by itself. Have to do something to put water back in the cup. So if the power of the neshama left the organ, how does it come back? Just by fixing the organ. Anyone ever come across this question? Now you did. So the answer is that the organ actually is like a magnet. It draws the power of the neshama into itself. Which means once the organ is repaired and it's in its full health, now the organ draws the power of vision into the eye. And the other organ in the ear draws the power of hearing into the ear. Or the organ of the mouth, the vocal cords, draw the power of speech into it. So that's the other reason why mitzvahs are like organs. Mitzvahs are not only a vessel that Hashem's light rests in this mitzvah, but it's actually an organ or a vessel that draws down Hashem's light into itself and through it into the world. That's mitzvahs. What is Torah? Torah yadam hu nefesh. Torah is compared to blood. What does blood do? Mamshechas chayes beivarim da mitzvahs. Just like blood gives life to all the organs in the body, so too, Torah gives life to the mitzvahs, which basically means Torah explains the mitzvahs, explains how to do it, what to do, what you can do, explains the reason for the mitzvahs, and so on. That's in Torah. So Torah is like blood, and mitzvahs are more like the organs, which explains another difference we find between Torah and mitzvahs. Mitzvahs and bizman u'makom. Mitzvahs are limited by time and space, which means every mitzvah has a certain time. You can only do this mitzvah by day. This mitzvah can only be done at night. This mitzvah can only be done when there's a Beis HaMikdash. This mitzvah can only be done in Eretz Yisrael, in a certain place. this mitzvah can be done in that place, only in this place. All these halachas. Let's say, like he's going to give an example of karbanis. Bringing a carbon is a mitzvah that can only be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. You're not allowed to bring a carbon outside of the Beis Hamikdash. But Torah, there's no limitations. There's no limitations of time and space when it comes to learning Torah. Torah is a mitzvah a person could do and should do every moment of the day, no matter where they live, no matter what the circumstances are. But not only that, even when you compare it to mitzvahs, for example, carbon. There's another thing about a carbon. Look at the bracket. Kala Isik, the Torah's Eila, whoever learns Torah and learns the laws of carbon Eila, Ki'ilu Hikrav Eila. It's as if he brought the carbon. Gam Kashena Bizmana Makam HaKrava. So imagine someone needs to bring a carbon, and he learns Torah, and he learns that part of Torah that talks about this carbon. I think I mentioned one of the classes that is wrote down in Shulchan Aruch, if a person had a miracle and Hashem saved their life, there was a certain danger. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, would bring a carbon called carbon toida. Carbon toida is the carbon of thanksgiving. We're thanking Hashem. Today, we can't bring a carbon, so it's brought down. One of the things you could do is learn the Chumash that talks about this carbon. And if you learn the Chumash and the laws of this carbon, it's as if you brought the carbon. But wait a second, you're not in the Beis Hamikdash, you're not even in Eretz Yisrael, you're not a kohen, so all the conditions of bringing a carbon are totally not in place. How can I read about a carbon and say it's as if I brought it? I'm not a kohen, I'm outside of Eretz Yisrael, I'm outside of the Beis Hamikdash, it's at night. All these things are the wrong things for a carbon. The answer is, Torah is not limited in time and space. So this is similar to the guf and the neshama. Now, guf shul gashmi, the guf, which is physical, humugdam is manamakam, is limited by time and space. The physical body has the limitations of time and space. But the neshama, shehi ruchnius, neshama is something which is ruchnius, ulemaylam is manamakam. That's above time and above space, which means that Torah and the neshama is not limited in that sense. It could be any place. And the neshama could be one place in the world at one moment, the neshama itself, and another place in another moment. I mean, there's a story, which is really an amazing story with the Rebbe Rashab, but it's a little bit different. I'll still tell you why it's different, but it's probably connected to this. There's a story with the Rebbe Rashab that there was a woman who lost her husband. Lost her husband, meaning that she didn't know where he was. I think we spoke about this. She's called an aguna, which means she doesn't know if her husband is alive somewhere and he can't come home because he's being held captive, or he's not coming home because he's angry, or he's not well. She doesn't know what it is. So, by the end of the day, being that he's not here and he's not giving her a divorce, she can't remarry. So she's stuck. She doesn't have a married life, and she can't have a married life as long as she doesn't know what happened to her husband. If she finds out that he's not alive, she could remarry. If she finds him and he gives a get, she could remarry. So, it once happened by the Rebbe Rashab that there was a woman. She was not from Chabad. That someone told her, "Why don't you go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Maybe he'll be able to help you, give you guidance or bracha to find your husband." So apparently she couldn't see the Rebbe Rashab, but she gave over the request, and she got an answer. The answer was that she should go to this and this city, and Hashem will help her. It was a faraway place. She traveled to that city, and she gets off the train. Looking around like, where do I go now? I guess she has to start to inquire if anyone knows her husband or this place. She sees a Jew, and she says to him, "Would you know perhaps somebody by this and this name that's supposed to be in this town?" He said, "Yeah, he works in this factory not far from here." It tells her which factory. She goes into the factory, and sure enough, to her shock, there he was. And obviously there was some reason, he got angry, or he didn't have any money, so he went in to make money, he was too embarrassed to come home. Whatever, he agreed to give her a divorce so she can go on with her life. And she went back to Lubavitch. She wanted to say thank you to the Rebbe Rashad. And they gave her permission to meet with the Rebbe Rashad. When she walked in, she fainted. Why did she faint? She said, that's the person who I saw by the train station who told me where to go. So, and I told her, maybe imagining this is the face. She wouldn't faint if she hadn't seen that very same exact face. So this is different because it's a neshama in a group. So I don't know how that works. But let's say when we talk about Eliyahu Navi, he's at every seder around the world at the same time. The neshama is not limited. And the same is with other neshamas of tzaddikim or neshama, people that sometimes come to a person in a dream, a parent or a grandparent. They're not limited. They can be in one country, another country. They're buried in one country. They can show up in a different country. There's no limitations. So this neshama is, because it's the more physical something is, the more limited it is. The more abstract something is, the less limited it is. So neshama is not limited. The guf is. And the same is with Torah mitzvahs. The neshama of Torah, which is the Torah itself, is not limited. The mitzvahs have all the limitations. The same applies to the relationship between Torah and mitzvahs and the person. Learning Torah is something which is related more to the neshama. It's intellectual, it's logic, it's understanding. That's more than neshama in me. Mitzvahs are all about the guf. I have to do something with my hands, with my mouth, hair shirka with my ears, eat matzah with my mouth, have to digest it, eat the food. Mitzvahs, alila regularly have to walk with my legs and go to the Beis Hamikdash. 99% of the mitzvahs are all with physical objects and physical, using the physical body. Torah is more of a spiritual experience because it's intellectual. And the reason is because Torah is the neshama, so therefore it's connected to the neshama of the person. And mitzvahs are mitzvah tzedakah, and I have to take my physical hand, physical money, and give it to a physical person. And that's mitzvahs. So mitzvahs are the guf, and Torah is the neshama. To be continued. Rabbi Osman here. I just want to mention, we have another minute, that this one of the days that are coming up this week, it's going to be actually Sunday, is called Yud Beis Sivan. Yud Beis Sivan is called the end of Yemei Tashlumim. As you know, we don't say Tachno now, because in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, if you didn't bring a carbon or shvuas, you can make up for it up until the 12th day. The Rebbe always says, this also means spiritually, that if I feel I didn't do my shvuas the best way that I can still make up for it until Yud Beis, which is going to be Sunday. So, Tavshin Nun Aleph, on that day, it was a Shabbos, something very unusual happened, never happened before. And that is that the Rebbe had a Farbrengen. Farbrengen, as usual, is 1:30. The Rebbe finished by 3:30, 4 o'clock. And I was Mincha, everybody went home. And I remember personally, I used to come to the dorm every Shabbos after the Farbrengen at 8 o'clock to review the Farbrengen. The women would come there and go over briefly what happened by the Farbrengen. At 8 o'clock, I start talking. All of a sudden, the door flies open. And someone screams, Rebbe's Farbrengen again. Can't be. But it's first, they know people are running in the streets. Anyway, I walk out, yeah, everybody's running. Anyway, the Rebbe walked in to 7:70, 8 o'clock in the evening. The Rebbe walked in with a towel, with a quart filled with water, and the Rebbe wanted someone to bring challah. It was totally unexpected. None of the secretaries were there. It was a very, very big Mashiach Dikah for bringing. But we know that when things go on down here that are very unusual, that means something's going on up there very unusual. There's more details to it, but there's no time. So we go to Halacha with Rabbi Ozdebe, which is back down to earth. Good Shabbos, everybody.